Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. You may not think dial calipers are something that you would have in a woodworking shop, but I'm going to show you how I use them, how it helps me get even more precise, and you may just find a use for it in your shop. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help you take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new to our channel, be sure to subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and don't forget to turn on the notification on your mobile device so you'll know every time we release a new video. Good? All right, back to the bench. So here's the ones that I use most common. These are an old pair of plastic Vernier calipers. I've had these for almost 40 years, and I always found them useful just for going in and measuring things that were sometimes a little bit hard to read with just using a steel rule. Got these probably 10, 15 years ago. Use them a ton. So you dial it into 0. Actually, I'll show you a little more about that afterwards. But there's 3 things that you can do with this that I find useful. You can measure the outside, in other words, the thickness of that tenon. Then you can close these opposite jaws down and measure the inside. And you can extend the rod at the bottom and you can measure the depth. Those 3 things I find lots of uses for. I'm going to walk through and show you some of them. But for the relatively inexpensive price of something like this, it allows you to take your precision up a notch beyond what you can read off a steel rule or off your measuring tape. This really helps you get it precise. There's 2 common versions of these calipers. This one is completely what you would call analog, doesn't require any batteries, easy to read. Well, there's a little bit to it, but I mean it's relatively easy to read. These are digital, so you turn them on, 0 it in, and then it'll give you your measurements, and you can actually have it in fractions or in millimeters or in thousandths of an inch. And while that's really nice, it does require a battery, and with my luck, the battery's always dead when I need it the most. So I'm going to focus my attention on the dial one that I use most commonly in this shop. These come obviously in metric or in imperial. I work with imperial, so for those of you who are metric, I apologize. Same techniques apply. So, real simple. There's over here you have scale, you have 1 inch broken down into tenths. And I know that's kind of mixing metric with imperial, but you know, if you want a thousandth of an inch, that's what you got to do. So from 0 to 1. So if I open up my calipers just a little bit, this is going to break each 1/10 of an inch down into 100 parts. So that's where you get your thousandths. So anything prior to the 1 showing up right here is going to be, in this case, 10 thou, 56 thou, 90 thou, and then when you hit here, you're 100 thousandths of an inch or 1/10 of an inch. So if you move up here, if I'm measuring something and I stop right there, the first thing I'm going to do is look at and see what number do I have showing. So I know it's 6. I can't see the 7, so it's got to be 6 something. So it's going to be point, because it's less than 1, 0.6. Then I come over here and I see the 3, so 0.63, and then I count the number of notches beyond that, and it's sitting at 3. So it's going to be 0.633, or 633 thousandths of an inch. Pretty simple. So if I was going to take this piece of wood, it's actually it's a little more than 3/4. So 3/4 would be 750 thou. This one comes in at not quite at the 8. That's a little bit hard to read because it looks like it is, but if you look up here and you see it hasn't hit the 0 yet, so it still has to be 7. So this is going to be 792.5 thousandths of an inch. As soon as you go beyond that, you go past 1, then you know you've got to factor that in. So I can see my 1, but I can't see my 2. So now I know it's going to be 1 point. And if we went back to this, it'll be 1 point. And then we've got our 5. So 1.5. And we come all the way here to 9. So 1.59. And it's almost at the 9. So 1.599. And that takes you right out to, you can go as far as 8.5 inches on this. Simple. Okay, before you start, you want to make sure it's zeroed in. So you want to clean your jaws off to make sure there isn't any debris in there. Close that. Now you want the needle to be right at the 0. So you can loosen this down here, and that'll allow you to turn the dial, and you just lock it in on the 0, tighten it up. This little thumb screw up here will lock it in place so that it won't move. So if I lock that, now I can't, that'll preserve this dimension. So that normally would be backed off. And what you do to move this is you just push in and turn. That engages the little teeth on the underside, and that helps that, allows that to move. If I'm getting ready to cut a dado, I want it to fit perfectly. So I'll take the piece that's going to fit into the dado, and I will squeeze that between the two jaws. Now I like to do this a couple of times because it doesn't take much. You can be off just a little bit of an angle and it'll change. So that reads 36 and a bit. If I do it again, I should have said that correctly, 736 and a bit. That's 736 and a bit. That's 736 and a bit, so I can rely on that. So now I've got to come over and I've got to make that same size with my dado stack. Well, I can measure, I know each one of these is, this is going to give me an 1/8 or 0.125. Each one of these chippers is an 1/8, 0.125, and then I can simply go in and do the math, but you can't always buy commercially spacers that are what you need. So I've gone in and I've made some out of paper, out of shim stock, and I can just go in and add it up until I get exactly what I want, put that all together, and usually it'll get you exactly where you want. And the reason I say I like to use this, if you don't do that, it's a bunch of trial and error of putting the dado stack together, making a test cut, checking it, it's too loose, too tight, you got to take it all apart again. Oh, what a pain. So much easier to go in and accurately measure with something like this. I often like to build furniture with just hand tools, in other words, no power tools at all. So if I'm building a drawer and I want to go in and I want to get my pieces of my drawer size as close as possible. Well, when you're removing stock with a hand plane, you don't always remove it as evenly or as uniformly as you would like. So you can come in and you can very accurately measure that side. So that measures 448 thou. And if I go over to this side, it measures 452 thou. Well, if it meant something to me, I could go in and with a plane set to take maybe a thou off, go in, I know exactly how many I need to take off, and I would just feather that over. I can come back and I can check it again. Or I can find out if I've got a bump, maybe somewhere in the middle, if that shows up being a little bit thicker. This at the end is 450. In the middle, it's 455, and at the end, it's 452. So not as precise as I may need it to be. Doesn't always have to be dialed in that close, but when I do want it, it's nice to be able to do it with something like this. Hey, if you like this video, we have more. Our monthly newsletter has subscriber-only content, discounts monthly on tools, and anything we bring out that's new, subscribers get first crack at it. Click on the link below. Let's get back to work. I love to make wood hinge boxes. In order to get the kind of precision that I want, things have to be really close. So this is my little jig that allows me to drill a hole in the end of each segment of dowel. And if you haven't seen that, we can leave a link below to how I make these boxes. But there's a little pin in between each segment of dowel. And it has that little hole that the pin goes into is only a 1/16 of an inch in diameter, and it has to be dead center. This is the jig that we make for drilling those on center. But when you turn your dowel, if it's too loose, it's going to wobble. If it's too tight, it's going to burnish it. It doesn't come out very precise. So I have this gizmo that I made for turning dowel. And it takes a lot of precision to dial it in perfect. But I eventually want to have it so that these are measuring 0.250. So you can see this is too big. That's coming in at 0.256. That, if I tried to put that in there, that would be really sticky. I wouldn't be able to hold on to it, and it would burnish it. And that one needs to be fixed, obviously. Check this one. This is a little closer. This is 252. That might be able to get it in, but I prefer it to be right on 0.250. Then it'll sit down into the groove exactly. So being able to measure it like that, I can go in and just add shims or take shims away underneath the blade that does the cutting, and it's a bit difficult to explain, but you'll see it in the video we leave the link to. Now this is going to make it sound like I'm trying to be a professor. When I cut dovetails, we use something called the Sean shim. Sean McDermott, combat wounded vet that came in one of our classes, came up with this idea. We turned it into a product. And again, I'll leave a link to this, but it allows you to offset your tailboard from your pin board when you're transferring the tails to pins precisely, and it matches your kerf. Well, you've got to be able to determine what is the thickness of my kerf. Now, new, our kerf would be 24 thou. Allow me to explain. The saw plate right here is 20 thou. There's 2 thou set per side, which is a total of 24 thou. However, every time that blade gets sharpened, if you think of these, look at it like this, if you look at the set of the teeth as these points sticking out, as you file them each time, they get a little bit shorter, and as a result, the set comes in a little bit. Well, we make up for that on the Sean shim because that's what the 23, 24, 25, and 26 allows for when you get a little smaller set. So I often will take this in, and I'm going to get right across. I want to use the wider part back here so I can actually get several teeth in there, and that shows as just under 24 thou. So that 24th setting would work perfectly. I don't want to make this a math class, and you wouldn't want me teaching you math, but I barely know enough to be dangerous. But a lot of times we work in fractions, so having a thousandth of an inch or any number like that doesn't always jive with what we're doing. There's all kinds of charts that you can get on the internet that will do the conversion for you. It's easy enough to do the other way around. In other words, go from a fraction to a thousandth. You simply, if you had a 16th, you divide 1 divided by 16, and that gives you 0.0625. The easy ones are, obviously, a half inch is going to be 500 thou. 3/4 of an inch is going to be 750 thou. A quarter of an inch is going to be 250 thou. Of course, you can break that in half to get an eighth, would be 125 thou. Get your chart, make your life easier. But I would encourage you to consider something like this to help dial in, pardon the pun, and make it so that your things work perfectly on the first time, maybe the second time instead of the 10th time. It can be really aggravating when you got to keep going back and forth, dialing it just a little bit more, Learn to use one of these, and you can eliminate a lot of that. Good luck with your woodworking and your math. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the plane and chisel icon below, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our in-person and online workshops.